take hora nei e, kia pai mai rā tō tātou whakapāho ki utara e, kia tau iru nei te rangi Māori e me te aroha e, haere mai rā, tau mai rā
Ua noa nei ngā heke roimata, e maringi noa ana i tawa anu i a tāne. Ka papa kapa hū ko te hingo te tō taranui. Kuru pākarana ko te honga korokoro a tāne, e rauhirere nei te ke te kōrero, ko koe rā, te taumata haumata kua he ngātu. Nō reira moe mai, moe mai, moe mai rā. Haere atu rā, ki te iwi nui te pō, ki te mata nui te rangi, ki te oranga mutunga kore. E kia nei te kōrero, he pai maunga tū te ao, tū te pō, he pai tangata ngarono atu. E kore a mahara e mutu, ti hei Māori ora.
Kia ora. For those of you unfamiliar with Māori protocol, tikanga Māori, you have been formally welcomed to this documentary and this marae here at Auckland University of Technology, because it's a kaupapa Māori work underpinned by Māori culture and values. First, the kāranga, the woman's call of welcome. Then, the karakia, a prayer to honour those who've gone before, the pioneers of Māori film and television production. My name is Ella Henry. This documentary is about my research on Māori who own independent screen production companies that have produced a significant body of work for, with, and by Māori. They are the taumata, the panel of speakers who will share their journeys and stories. I wanted to explore their narratives, history, and heritage, which have shaped their careers and entrepreneurship in Māori screen production. Haere mai, no mai, welcome. Rhonda Kite is Te Aupōuri, but was born in Auckland. She owns Kiwa Films, Kiwa Media, Voice Q, Sing Q, and Q Books.
Born 1953 to a family of ultimately 9. Dad, merchant seaman, mum, freezing worker, factory worker, whatever she had to do, brought up in Otara most of our lives. One of the things that my parents insisted on was that when we left school, we were not allowed to work in the freezing works. I got a job as an office junior, and I found that I actually had a photographic memory for numbers. I went for an interview for a job as a creditor's clerk. I think what was going for me was that the accountant who interviewed me, he'd just come off his OE, so all we talked about was Europe. My boss didn't want any smart upstart. I didn't even know what a reconciliation was then, so I got the job. Within 12 months, I had her job. So I found my niche. I was being groomed to be the general manager, and Scrub, we were gone, so I was made redundant. About that time, I was coming up to my 40th birthday. I realised then that in order for me to discover what it was I really wanted to do, then I needed to take control of my own career. I was approached by a person, and he had a recording studio, so he asked me would I be interested in managing that for a couple of years. I told him that I wasn't interested in managing it, but I was interested in maybe looking at becoming his business partner. I realised that to be a producer took all the skills that I had. So I just happened to be at the launch of TV3's Inside New Zealand initiative. I'm standing there having a drink with Vincent Burke, and I started saying, why doesn't someone make a documentary about the success stories that came out of Otara? And he says, yeah, you're right, someone should. 2 days later, he rings me and he says, well, are you going to make it or not? And I went, what? Now, with that documentary, I won a television award, TV Guide award. A lot of the changes that I've made in my business have been through necessity. So I'm a necessity entrepreneur, really. I start looking at post-production for film and television. I start making documentaries, but that's not enough because we're working in a contestable funded environment. So I need to create some other form of activity. The first Māori television channel is starting up. I think back to watching Fred Flintstone speaking Arabic on television. We should be able to do this in Māori. Why can't we? And guess what? What do you need? Well, I need a recording studio. Oh, I just happen to have one. But I had to convince them that children out there in the world, our Māori children out there in the world, did want to watch cartoons and did want to watch them in their own language. I had to find a more cost-effective way of the process of dubbing from one language into another. Anything's possible, and that's my mantra, if anything, is that from a technology perspective, no one can tell me that it can't be done. It's just not being done right now. That's how I made the segue into what we're doing now. Yeah, multimedia, online, interactive touch, applications. When we lost our mum, I had 8 other siblings who turned to me and said, okay, Ron, what do we do now? It's a tricky one, this one, bringing family into business, because there's got to be a certain skill set. One thing that you want is someone watching your back, and no one's going to watch your back other than your family. And there's always the one person who's going to take the risk. And because the priority is generational wealth, it's not about them anymore, and it's not even about me. There's only room for one dictator in this business, and that's me. I went to a record company in Manhattan, and they go, we love New Zealanders. And I said, oh, do you? That's nice, you know. And then they go, yeah, our biggest shareholder is Doug Meyer. It pisses me off a bit, because those companies here that really just need a leg up, and you're not asking for funding, you're asking for investment. Like, you have backed yourself. You want to commercialise your product overseas. You've got to have been out into the marketplace and maybe even turning over a few mil before you can even get their assistance. Well, in that time, they shouldn't be getting the assistance. So what do? We either sell our IP overseas, or we move overseas, or we fold. I'm a quick learner, you know, I do this. We grew up learning how to walk on either side of the fence, Pākehā side or the Māori side, but no one knew nor was able to teach us how to walk down the middle. Too white to be brown and too brown to be white. It wasn't the most comfortable place to grow up being Māori. I've had to find my own place within it, and I don't know that I have found it yet. I found it within myself, but I don't know that I found it in the Māori world per se.
Claudette Hauiti is Ngāti Porou and Ngāpuhi. She's worked in journalism and broadcasting for 20 years and has owned Front of the Box Productions for the last 10.
I'm a second generation urban-born Māori baby, and back in those days our whenua wasn't offered to our parents to take home with them unless they argued for them and took them. Our whenua was flushed down the plug hole and seeped out into the whenua that is now the Northwestern Motorway. My father is from Ngāti Porou, Aitanga Hauiti. My mother is also Ngāti Kuta, Ngāti Hine, Ngāpuhi. Having parents who deliberately came to town so that we could have a better life than they did, there was an expectation at home that we must succeed. No expectation at school, huge expectation at home. At Teachers College, we were encouraged to take up some university papers. So we went to Auckland University and found a whole new world. And we fully embraced it to the point of, protesting, joining movements, sit-ins. It was just amazing. There were things outside of nursing and teaching that Māori girls could do. I was still playing sports and, pursuing that area, but it dawned on me one day when some really good friends of mine came back from playing softball in Italy and they had no jobs. Geez, shit, I better put my brain into gear and get money off using my brain. So I looked around and thought, well, maybe I could, go into sports reporting, because there weren't any women at that time. I phoned the Herald, I phoned the editor, the sports editor, said yes, you can be the netball reporter. Wanted to finish my degree, looked and saw around New Zealand, found one in Australia, and lo and behold, the course was being run by a Kiwi guy. And so I phoned him and he said, yes, and you're Māori as well too, which is a huge point of difference. Please apply. Applied, got in, went, and it was just an eye-opener. We were taught to look at the political ramifications when covering sports games, that it wasn't just about who won and who lost. And the Sunday News got wind of this woman who is a sports reporter. They asked me to work part-time for them as a rugby league reporter. And then Aotearoa Radio came along and they were looking for a sports editor. Then TV3 opened up and they said they were looking for some people in the sports department, so I went there. Then went to One World of Sport and worked there, and then an opening came up in the Māori Programs department. There were more pressing issues for Māori than just sport. So moved me into news and current affairs, and saw documentary making as one of those areas. But unfortunately for me, I wasn't able to do that and work at the Māori Programs department. So started up a company. My whole career pathway is in more issues based. If you want as many people to see it as possible, you have to show it offshore. The only way you can show it offshore is via the internet. Being Māori, being a woman, being gay, being takatapui have all impacted on my perspective of life. But the major contributing influence has to be the fact that I'm a Māori. There are lots of people that have come into my life that have shaped my perspective. In terms of mahi, I can honestly say, no one. I think there's various reasons for that. One is that I've been slightly ahead of everybody else. In terms of being a current affairs director, there was nobody else. There were other men, but there were certainly no other women. How I've shaped Front of the Box Productions as a business model. I work on the business while they work in the business. Front of the Box Productions has been around for 10 years now. We wouldn't have survived if we hadn't have manipulated the disadvantages to advantage us.
Brad Harmy is Ngāti Awa, Kahunganu, Tūwharetoa and Kaitahu. He has worked in broadcasting for 25 years and been a partner in a number of production companies.
I was born in Rotorua, but mostly brought up in Whakatane. I did journalism, so my entry into the media world was through a Māori journalism course that we did in Rotorua. Most of us that did that course, a lot of us ended up working at TVNZ under Ernie Leonard in 1986-ish. So I worked in there for about 8 years. And then I finished there and spent 2 years writing the biography of my grandfather's life before the old people died. And at the same time, I was interested in drama. And Kerry Carter and we always used to talk about ghost stories. And then Mataku got some money. So that was how I got into drama, really. If there was a hero in my life, it would be my grandfather, and he was big and bold, and he was a little bit famous too, which was cool. We used to have rooms in our house that were considered tapu because they were where all his books were. A lot of his materials over the years actually helped create stories. My mum tells me this story where when I was born and I was 2 or 3 months prem, I came back from hospital and he kind of chose me as the one that would take on his mantle, because he was one of those guys who never slept, did his work in the day, and then he spent the rest of the night writing everyone's stories down that came. These are all people who, as teenagers, were running with Te Kōti. He'd put me in a chair next to him, next to the fire, because I could only sleep kind of in a chair standing up, and then he would chant everything into me. I'd go somewhere and I'd hear these old guys talking. I'm going, I know that story, I know what's going to actually happen next. And then I'd find those stories in his manuscript books. The whole thing of storytelling and genealogy was actually instilled in me as a baby. I just have a photographic memory like him. He's got a photographic memory. And I'm the only grandchild that holds that stuff. So I'm a little bit worried now because I could pop off tomorrow. Well, where's all this stuff going to go? So I've got to find someone in the family that can hold it. I didn't actually want to do journalism. It's just my uncle and a few others had created this Māori journalism course because they needed it. And I hated it. I hated journalism because I had to get over my shyness. But I look back now and go, man, actually that was the best thing I could have done, because you can't tell stories unless you can talk to people. And Manu, who was like a second dad to us, he also influenced me. I watch him, he's quite an entrepreneurial guy. He instilled a lot of stuff in me about working hard and about being very Māori, but going across the divide. I just watched those guys be quite forceful, but they always had a good reason. And then I realised a lot of the old people were like that. They had loud voices, they were authoritative, and they knew what they were talking about. And I realised if I'm going to make it in this world, I've actually got to be like that. So at that point on, I said I would always have my say at the table. You have no power over your stories unless you own them. We created Four Winds Films because we felt that all our stories were actually being made under Pākehā thinking. It didn't quite work out like that because we couldn't get loads and loads of work in to really sustain everyone. The thing I see now is your home life and the way you are at home, even the way you were brought up, really does affect the way you relate to people. So if you're going to have a company that has a number of other people involved, you're going to make sure you know those people well because their moral view of life and their family life really does affect how the structure of a company works. Essentially, I would say I'm more of a story person than a company person. Stories that have a message to transform lives. I'm a church fella and I kind of think like that. If you haven't got that passion in you to drive something to make it happen, you'll fall down every time. I heard a really good statement the other day that you hire and work with the best people in the land, and then you will live in the land of the giants.
Nicole Hoey is Ngāti Kahu and Te Opodi and was born in Kaikohe. She has owned Cinco Cine Productions for over 20 years.
Our whānau is a huge influence on my life especially. I had a mother who went back, who was a school teacher as well as a mother. I had a pretty crazy father. He was always encouraging us to do things that were outside the box and to explore things and not to be scared of things. And Mum, being a school teacher, was very disciplined and quite regimented in how our life was led. We go home every Christmas, we go up north, and as a whānau all camp together on land around the bottom of Te Oniroa Tohi. And one of the reasons we keep on going back especially was to ensure that our kids knew the value of the whānau, the hapu, and then the iwi. I was sent away to boarding school at 12, and my mother and all the rest of the whānau had gone to Queen Vic, but I was a hockey player and Queen Vic didn't have a hockey team. We had to learn to lose in hockey and be able to walk back on that field the next day and believe we could win. I guess in business, that's what it's about. I mean, as I say to people, whenever I talk to them in business, no doesn't mean no to me. And then moving on to people like Trish Downey, who taught me the bulk of what I needed to know to be able to go on and open my own company up at the age of 24. We weren't heavily politicised, I'd say. I know the kuras were set up, the kohangas were set up, so when I had Tom was the minute I think I became politicised about who I was. I actually decided in the hospital that he was going to go to kohanga. Also, I wanted his reo to be very, very strong when he left, because at home he didn't have a strong base of reo. His base of reo came from kohanga. I loved kohanga, and I looked after the money, and I got us money, money in our kohanga, so I was the money person out there. I was making television commercials when Tom was at kohanga, and Patina Hollings at the time was the commissioner for TV3, head of commissioning, and she said, look Nicole, if you could give me a Māori program that would rate, I'd put it in prime time. And by the time I went back to her, I had this 1 minute programmette, which was really huge for TV3 at the time, because that one minute was a huge amount of revenue that they would be giving up. And that was their commitment to us with the reo as well. So that, and that was a huge success, both politically for TV3, but also audience-wise for TV3. And that's when I did actually start making 1 hour programs for them, all in te reo Māori. Not in prime time, however. I went on to decide that I would make a show for Tom and his mates, because one day he was watching What Now, and he turned around to me and said, oh Mama, Mama, if you made a show for us in Māori, all those Pākehās wouldn't be able to ring in and win the prizes. And I actually thought, yeah, you're right. Well, why don't you guys have a show? Why don't we have a show all in the reo for our kids of that age? First it was called Tūmeke, and it was on TV4, and that changed to Pūkana. and we've been on here now for 13 years with it. So the generation it was made for is now making it, which is something that, you know, I'm extremely proud about. Pūkana is my second child, because I didn't have another baby after Tom. I based the organisational structure of Cinco Cini from the kohanga. At the centre of kohanga's organisational structure is the word aroha, which also sits at the centre of Cinco Cini's structure. And in terms of that aroha, it means that sometimes we have to do things in business that don't make us particularly popular. Sometimes as in my job and also in the productions jobs, you have to tell people they can no longer work for you, or you don't have the money to pay them, or actually they're not doing a particularly good job. When you're doing that, it needs to be done with no malice, and you need to make sure that it's actually done with truth. And so you're moving with love when you make those decisions that actually come from a place where it is actually best for the company to make that move. The next circle that we have is whānau. Anyone who works for Cinco Cini becomes whānau and stays whānau with us. The next circle out is what we call our hapu, and our hapu are our productions like Pūkana, Kōrero Mai, Nights in the Gardens of Spain, SpongeBob SquarePants, I could go on forever, Manitui Ori Ori. They're all our hapu. And then the next circle out is the iwi, which is Cinco Cini, and that's the only circle. The outer circle is the only one that goes outward as well as comes inward.
Te Kauhoe Wano is Te Atiawa and Ngāti Awa. He entered broadcasting at 37. He and wife Piri own Tour Television.
Born and bred in Hāwera. I went through Catholic schooling originally because mum and dad are still staunch Māori Catholic. Dad, very hands-off approach, but just said, this is what you're going to do, and that was it. Mum, being a typical Māori mother, was full of nurturing and cooking and being for us. We were always right and Dad was always wrong, you know. They were both achievers too, because Mum studied hard while raising us. We saw that at home, so they had impacts on us as well. I wanted to be a seventh former because there weren't a lot of Māori seventh formers, so I had those goals, and I think they both came from my parents. And I wanted to be a phys ed teacher. My next path was Palmerston Teachers College, and when I got down there, I met half a dozen Māori rangatahi that spoke Māori, and after 2 weeks hanging out with them at orientation and partying, I said, I want to be like you. But the real, 60s, 70s, it wasn't something that was really promoted, especially at school. Lucky enough that I came out with a degree and 4 years of learning Māori. I realised that all my real influences were Ngāti Porou, or Tūhoi, so it was time to go home. Getting back onto my marae and enjoying learning about my marae, something that I hadn't done a lot of growing up. Then Oe, and then back to Taranaki, where I met Piri. We married, tamariki, early 90s, teaching at the Polytech right through the 90s. So we tried to establish our own sort of real total immersion wānanga in Taranaki Polytech. At the same time, however, we established the Korimako Taranaki, our Māori radio station, and that was my introduction to broadcasting. I would be the contact for TVNZ. One little job that I'd done, Tainui Stevens approached me and said, would you be interested in coming up to work for Māori programs? And I was, 37, and established career in education. But Piri and me had to sit down and had a talk and said, look, if it doesn't work out, education's going to be there to fall back on. Let's go and see what Auckland's like. And I must admit that first 3 months I was asking, what the hell am I doing here, But at the same time it was exciting. One guy that had a big influence on me was Reuben Collier. He taught me so much about camera shots and styles and treatment and all those sorts of things. He was really free with his knowledge. And all Māoris, I believe, want to tell their own stories. I'd love to make my own stuff, but I didn't have the confidence to be able to do that. I knew that I needed to spend time with a network. People like the camera operators there, one of the first questions I'd ask them was, how long have you been a cameraman? And if they said 25 years, my directing style would be, oh, what do you think? One of my first park hour broadcasting influences was Melanie Reid. And I rung her up and I said, I want some time in the newsroom. And she set up an interview. I was offered a freelance role in the news, a sports journo. Māori television was gearing up, getting started. And, I thought, now there's an opportunity for me to make my own programs. Now, the initial setup wasn't as clean as me stopping one job. I still didn't have the confidence to do that. So I spent a year in the TV1 newsroom. By the time I walked out of TVNZ, we had 3 shows on the run. Hikoi Mahanga, the Twins on the Road, really came out of my passion for surfing. And also showing people that we could use the reo anywhere. Communication skills is still number one for me in this game. Being motivated, when the going gets tough and you've got a couple of no's, being able to get out of bed and start writing another one. Also building a good positive lifestyle, with your family, having the ability to work with pity has been awesome. We do feel that it's a whānau unit working together for the same goal. When I talk about lifestyle, it's also outside work, so surfing and going back to my maunga every chance I get, they're all important things to me too, and I think they help me be a good broadcaster. If you've got a passion for telling stories, you're going to be a natural broadcaster.
Robert Pōwhiri is Ngāti Hakapatu Hiuhiu of Ngai Tūhoe.
Our grandfather, Teiki o te rangi Pōwhiri, was a major influence on us in that he was the purangatira of our area. He was a very kind, very gentle person, very clever. Our grandmother was this wonderful woman who was a huge worker. We actually lived in a compound around the old people. And sort of like 5 o'clock they'd do their karakias at first thing in the morning. They were inculcating all sorts of things into our heads as kids. Coming from a history of Tūhoe, a history of resistance against the Crown, our grandfather I felt that he never relinquished his sense of sovereignty and forbade us to speak English in their presence. Then we went to school. You weren't allowed to speak Māori there, and we only had to speak English. And by the time we got to university, we had to agitate there to have Māori. So we became Māori language zealots. The next strategy was to try to get people into television. I quickly became aware that I had to play this other persona, and I knew that Marcus basically would prefer the gay persona. So I went to help set up the first program, which is Koha in 1980. Dedicated, even though it was only 15 minutes on a Sunday. I always complained then. Once we got there, our strategy was then set up the department, waiata. We'd been advocating having a program about the treaty, and of course we were never allowed to do it. We had a big run-in with the head of the department at that time, and effectively gave me an ultimatum: you either have to be a corporate person or a Maori. And I said, well, I can't choose. I'm both. I'm a Māori. We're here to do Māori programs. He said, but no, you're here to make programs for the wider audience. They carefully selected people to work in there that that they could manipulate, and that they really wanted to be quite like them. But if you were too Māori or too political, not acceptable. So we left. And I have to say it was the best thing that ever happened, even though it was deeply traumatic at the time. We thought, well, it's best that we make the program and sell it to them, rather than them dictating to us what sort of programs. They allowed us in, but begrudgingly. And, it was because of the Te Reo Māori case, which was taken to the Privy Council, which proved that it was taonga under the treaty. 10 years later, they finally made the reo an official language. Well, it took us over 20 years to set up the channel. And I guess this speaks to the resistance on the part of the power culture to having us included in this in the spectrum. We had to fight all the way, because it was really a very painful experience within the mainstream, within television New Zealand. Very, very painful. And, you have to compromise all the time, and, we want to look back in 20 years' time and say, well, we did the best we could given the limited budget that we had. Now, in this series, Kōrero ki ngā karakia, we're using babies and animals. It's philosophy is trying to expand the reo. One time we took the kids to speak to the orangutan. It was the most incredible experience. We all stood there crying, and it looked very lonely because it was on its own, depressed, and anyway, these kids started singing to it. One by one, they went up and did an uthi on the orangutan. Oh my God, the power of our kids.
Te Arapakahi is Ngāti Pāua and Tainui, but was born in Christchurch. He is a partner in a number of different production companies.
Ko tahi te wā ia tau, ka whakatika mai mātou, mai o tau tahi ki puke kohe. My father was a jazz fusion drummer. So Billy T.K. always promised my father that they'd go to Canada for a tour, and they got as far as Christchurch. Where they met their wives, my mother, she's the daughter of a doctor, and my father, his family are potato pickers from Pukekohe. She's a school teacher. She took a year off school 2 years ago to learn te reo Māori. Something happened to me in fifth form. A Māori theatre company came to our school, headed by a man called Jim Moriarty. And Jim burst through our school hall for the next hour and a half, completely spellbound by Jim. So when I graduated from high school, I left Christchurch, headed up to Wellington, and joined his theatre company. It was an incredible introduction to the power of story every day. Came up to Auckland, attended University of Auckland, stayed with my nana for the first year out in Pukekohe. You can have a good conversation with her in Pākehā, but when she really comes alive is when she's speaking Māori. Not really a big, I have to learn te reo Māori in order to be a better person, but I just wanted to get closer to my nana and reconnecting to who I was as Waikato Ngāti Pāua. I fell in love with stories with my brother on a big double bed that we used to share when I was a little kid. And Dad was there and he used to roll over and tell us something. My mother, she brought stories, the written word into our life. But I do remember a night when I was 13 and Utu was on. That's where I first felt the power of cinema. Still carried on with a bit of acting up here while I was at uni. And I remember that there was this job going around the corner. I was a production assistant, a Māori children's series called Tiki Tiki. The producer, who was Paula Maxwell, wasn't very happy with one of the field directors. And I remember in that moment just turning around to him and going, I'll do it. So he looked at me and he goes, you're on. And then I was shooting these small inserts for Tiki Tiki by the end of the week. And I wrote a documentary proposal. Paula made some tweaks and it ended up being funded, and he backed me to be the director for this doco. I think I just turned 21, 32 now, and a lot of stuff under the belt, But when you look at the anatomy of the journey, happy coincidences, right time, right place, but not afraid to seize the opportunity. Had I not been thinking of stories myself, then that opportunity might have been lost. I was recruited as a director for a big series called Hawaii. I had a really good relationship at that time with my history lecturer, and he wrote the Hawaii series. I come through the history department, I understood about Māori methodology, ancient Māori knowledge, mātauranga Māori. The actual idea of having my own production company came about when I noticed that I would like to specialise in mātauranga Māori kaupapa. I wanted to develop something that was very specific, new technology, new imaging to bring out our Māori concepts. I really am a director-writer as opposed to a director-writer-producer. Producing something I can do, but it's not something I love doing. I've spent some time with Don Selwyn. He would always say, it's about the kaupapa. And you hear that, but he was somebody who really brought those words to life and lived them. Spent a lot of time with Merata in terms of story craft, writing. Professor Rawiri Taunui, he's been influential. He's my wife, of course, who in all honesty just keeps me real. If we can just get away from the pursuit of bright lights and get more into the craft work, then I think we're looking at careers as opposed to jobs. So now it's about heart, passion and craft.
Kay Elmers is hauraki in Ngāti Raukawa ki Tonga. She's worked in broadcasting for almost 20 years and has owned tūmanako productions for the last 10.
We spent our childhood collecting for the Red Cross and for the Leprosy Mission, and Dad was, in the Lions and very community-minded. Wanting to do something that contributed to the world was just something that I grew up believing was what you did. And this is my adoptive family that I'm referring to. I don't really know how at Bay Islands College I decided when I was about 14, 15 that I'd like to make documentaries, but I just thought that would be a good way to influence the world. I knew even from then they would be social issues type of documentaries. Another big influence was Richard Smith at Auckland University. When I did my postgraduate diploma in broadcast communications, he sort of took a roundabout way of influencing me because he spent the entire year telling us how ridiculous we were to think that we could influence the world through making television, making you all the more determined that you wanted to do that. My first job was at Māori programs at TVNZ. I was really fortunate to get straight into a whole group of practitioners who were all about social justice, and it was all about the message rather than just the craft of television. Everyday storytelling was always around the politics of it. Setting up my own production company really was probably mostly about controlling the work. Having been a director for many years, you're the person that goes out there, you're asking them to trust you to look after their stories, and effectively if you're working for another company, those aren't necessarily promises you're really in a position to make. Bottom line is, if you're not the producer and if you're not the production company who signed the contract with the broadcaster and the funder, you're not in total control of what happens with that material. So I realised that as long as I was kind of a gun for hire for anyone else, then I couldn't feel like I could make those promises with a lot of integrity. So I never actually went into it thinking, I want to create a business. If I want to control the projects, I have to have a company structure. The first company I set up with Aka, we had a partnership and everyone brought different skills. So that probably gave me the confidence then to feel that I could actually set up my own structure. It's not much fun. Nobody really wants to be doing end-of-year tax returns and worrying about the fact that the alarm goes off at 2 o'clock in the morning and you have to drag yourself out of bed and come and check out that nobody's stolen all your gear. But that's the price you pay, I think, for being able to then control your work to some extent. If you're going to take any money from anyone else to make anything, then there are strings attached. Me Huddle grew out of the fact that I had tamariki in immersion education. When Māori television was created, there just wasn't anything on screen reflecting that experience that they were having at school back to them. Had no experience in making children's television, so I spent quite a bit of time in development so that we could work with education specialists. A lot of kids that are in Rūmaki education have this kind of one world that's going on at school where they're being taught in Te Reo Māori but also with a kind of Māori worldview. But then they step outside of the school and that's not the world that they're living in. When my kids were young, they really did start thinking that Māori was just the language of school and the marae. The idea of Me Huddle was to try and reflect back to them that it is a language that can exist in all spheres of society. And to some extent, let's be honest, that is a constructed reality. But the idea was partly to try and normalise that for the kids and show it can be used everywhere. How can we actually use television as a vehicle for reinforcing and extending the language that they're getting? It may be idealistic, but the idea was that whānau can sit down with their tamariki and engage with the program if they can't actually sit down and help them with their homework because they haven't got a good enough deal to do that. But that was where Me Huddle came from.
Pio today is from Te Raroa in the Hokianga. He has worked in broadcasting for over 20 years as a writer, actor, comedian and producer.
You're from the far north. Our parents loaded us up and came down. Like, it was that whole rural-urban thing. We were whāngai, we were legally adopted by my parents, and my parents were in their mid-40s when they adopted us. Native speakers, gum diggers, from another world, really. We were so blessed to have them sort of like grandparents bringing us up. We got a 3-bedroom house in Tatatu, and we all stayed in one room. So it was a couple of years before me and my brother ventured out to other parts of the house. Dad was a truck driver, then he ended up working for the power board. Mum stayed at home. There was no real help from Mum and Dad with regard to academic achievement other than they created a really wonderful home life and a base. I was always on school councils and things like that, which was an achievement I was always proud of. We had Māori around us who kept telling us that we had some stuff, you know. Mum and Dad introduced me and my brother to music early, so that whole entertainment seed was born. Most guys were spending money on a Friday and Saturday night. I was earning it. I started life as a car cleaner. Totally parky environment, but good guys, and they recognised some potential in me. I had an accountant who came to do my books and Māori fella. And he says, I'm the accountant for Aotearoa Radio. And I went, ping. Because I was taught by my dad that doors don't open, you have to give them a bit of a kick. Or ring the bell. Just keep your thumb on the bell of opportunity, you know. To cut a long story short, I ended up selling advertising for Māori Radio. And I always salute the pioneers who got us Māori Radio, because that became a training ground for a lot of people. That was a pathway for me into broadcasting that was provided by Māori. I was writing songs in the afternoon, like political satire. So my talents, I know that sounds whakahihi, but I don't mean it like that. Yes, I do. We should rejoice in our bloody talents. So my talents were in a waka that could be developed. I could have a go. I was cheeky as anything, but not disrespectful, okay? Next minute, the phone rings. Oh, Brendan Butt here. Oh, yeah, what do you do, bro? He says, I'm the director. Māori director. Sure. $250 a minute. He says, oh, bro, I can whack a few extra verses and it'll be a half-hour song. Next minute, there's John Gadsby, David McPhail were in the stupid Ringo band singing this song. And that was the beginning of it. You were at the total mercy of the production houses that grabbed you as a perceived talent, and you were milked like a cash cow, basically. What happens is you give your ideas over, they pay you $500 for the idea, and they get all the generation of income and blah, blah, blah. Consequently, having your own production company or companies, okay, is a good idea. So main things is some control, some ownership of your material, and the ability to make television to show off our people in a true light. And that's it. I've been in business with other people. Some have worked, some haven't. I'm not being sexist here, but I do find that our wahine Māori have been wonderful partners because of their attention to detail. It's like picking a football team. Same thing. You make sure you've got people in the right places or else you just lose it. We're like brothers and sisters in this group. That doesn't always happen in a Pākehā world. When you're with a group of people who have the same whakaaro about broadcasting and the imagery of Māori people to a broader audience who are on the same page, that makes you strong. I have a code of ethics that my parents gave to me. And it's not written down, it just, the hairs, you know, you can feel your tupuna on your shoulder, go, kaua haere, don't go there. Kia tūpato, be careful. And I've always pledged to myself that I wouldn't use my people as a lever to make the masses laugh. From a production side, do the business properly. Deliver to the network because you have a contract, cuzzy. We have our documentary makers, we have our entertainers, we have our musicians, and I'm just part of that jigsaw, and it's a bloody privileged place to be, you know, and it's enhanced our life, eh?
Whetū Whala is of Māori and Samoan ancestry, hailing from Taranaki. She has worked in broadcasting for 25 years and owns Whala Media.
Ko Taranaki te mauna, ko Waitōtara te awa, ko ngā rauru kitahi te iwi. Engari ka huri ki te taha o taku pāpā, ko Ngāti Hāmoa te iwi. My mother had a traditional Māori upbringing. Her marriage was decided by our kaumātua, So when we were kids, she'd pile us all into the bed and she would tell us these tales. And we had the tale of her first marriage to a guy that she didn't love, and she jumped out the window and ran away from him. And then there was the tale of our father. She walked into a bar. Across the bar, she saw the most handsome man. So she went up to him, because my mother was very forward and she was very gorgeous looking, and a flirt. And he was probably the first foreigner she'd ever seen. One of my nicknames as a child was Ngutu, and there's not many careers that you can embark upon where having a big mouth is an asset. At private school, which was a Seventh-day Adventist school, if you took an interest in something, you had to pursue it. Having to communicate with people led eventually to my interest in the theatre. When I left school, my mother got me a job at Māori Affairs in Whanganui. I was what they called a clerical cadet, which I thought was a hideous job. So I chucked all of that in to run away to Auckland to be in the theatre. So my very first audition I went to was A Midsummer Night's Dream. So I went to walk past the door of the theatre, and this Māori man came out of the theatre and went, "Oi! Where are you going?" In all of that crowd, I was the only Māori person within Kui, and he pulled me to the front of the theatre. Paki Cherrington was amazing. He introduced me to Auckland thespian circles. I travelled the country for 2 years with town and country players. It was a time in New Zealand when New Zealand writing was finally being upbeat and put in a place where it had never been before. I became very dissatisfied with acting. And I did this wonderful course at the Wellington Arts Centre. I've had many patrons of the arts in my time, and my patron at that time was Kiri Carr. Tina Cook and I would turn up, and there'd be a huge roast and someone interesting for us to talk to. Rebecca Evans happened to be one of those interesting people. And she said, "Well, are you interested in television?" And Kiri goes, "Oh, well, this one's just done a PPP scheme on film and video." And she said, "Well, why don't you apply for coming here?" And I entered TVNZ. I stayed at TVNZ for 10 years. I was the only Māori person in my sector. Surely there's going to be more to join me, but there never was, so in the end I left. I began freelancing. At that time, there was hardly any Māori women producing or directing. The first production company I had was Ngā Karawhitu Productions. We had basically the same belief that Māori people had to actually go out there and try and bring home the bacon in film and television. I decided to become a producer and have my own company because it just seemed to be expedient. Behind it all was the same belief that led my mother to leave the Waitata Valley, and that was a belief that we as Māori people need to have control of our own destiny. I think that means tino rangatiratanga. We have to really strive for our own economic independence. I'm trying to feed myself and my family in a way that doesn't involve a handout. I'm a very competitive person. I'm naturally, call it the warrior woman, and so for me, it is the hurdle is the challenge. But I think you have to have a passion for it. Mahia te mahi. You are what you do, not what you say you do.
These 10 people own companies that have created a body of work which has challenged negative stereotypes about Māori, introduced a wider audience to te reo me ngā tikanga, Māori language and culture, mātauranga Māori, ancient Māori knowledge, drama, wit and political insights, all produced under the umbrella of authentic Māori authorship. They are all quite different in terms of heritage and history, but common themes have emerged from these narratives. Each has a strong sense of identity, who and what they are and want to be, regardless of the level of their Māori ancestry. They were all influenced by individuals, families, and communities that fostered their motivation and self-belief. Each shares a passion for storytelling, and in particular, telling Māori stories, with a focus on revitalisation of Māori language and culture. They all, at some point in their careers, realised that the only way they could control their creativity and storytelling was by owning their own companies. For these 10, entrepreneurship has delivered emancipation and contributed to economic and political sovereignty for themselves, their whānau, and their communities of interest. This study contributes to the development of a theory of Māori entrepreneurship in screen production. It has found that Māori entrepreneurship is characterised by notions of self-determination and emancipation. But unlike orthodox discussions of entrepreneurship, which often does not have a single economic dimension, Māori entrepreneurship in screen production is as much about strengthening identity as it is about starting a business. This theory, Wairua Auaha Māori entrepreneurship in screen production, has implications for government agencies and tribal entities who are charged with supporting the personal, professional and business development of Māori in the burgeoning screen industry. The challenge for those of us in Māori media education is to deliver information and skills, as well as nurturing self-belief and creativity, ensuring that future generations are connected to and revel in their identity as Māori, as storytellers, as entrepreneurs. As we began, so shall we end, by acknowledging those who have gone before and remembering their contribution to our identity, our storytelling, and our Māori screen industry.
Because being Māori is the centre of my being, it affects every single frame of film that I shoot or is associated with. I can't suddenly switch off that centre because I'm making a film and stop being a Māori because I'm making a film and become a director or some other person or other being. It affects every single film that I make, and I see from my centre it radiates out, and that's very much part of who I am and what I do. I think it shows in the work I do as well, I hope.
Police have just broken their way into the main meeting house. A big squad of police just assembled outside, and it looks as though they're just going to take away one by one about 150 protesters who are gathered in there and refusing to budge. The protesters, I can hear them chanting, but the police are not being moved, they're just moving in. Can't see too much from this stage, but they're leading them out one by one, and it looks like the last bastion at Bastion Point is being removed by the police right now. Mark Everton up at the point.